Chapter 4. Cox was led to the department designated for terrestrial prisoners, and Mason urged him to return the mask once they were with Schwartz and Karen. At that moment, Mason left, warning before disappearing. "Don't even think about moving from here, under any circumstances. You would die." "What has happened?" asked the German and the Russian. "I don't know. I need to reflect, as the surprise has left me somewhat stunned. I saw a woman machine appear and disappear, and I sense that something big must be happening now." "Something big? What do you mean?" "A space attack, if we're in space, and aerial, submarine, or underground, if we're in the air, water, or beneath the earth, anything is possible here." Karen Vasiev looked perplexed at Cox and asked, "Did you see her? What does she look like?" "I still don't know if I saw her or not. But I heard her, and if everything you've told me is true, we have much to learn from her. About everything." "Beautiful?" asked Schwartz. "Beautiful is an understatement," affirmed Dario. Karen whistled with a scowl of disdain. "And because of all that, esteemed comrades of captivity, the bold and never well-lauded Dario Cox is about to embark on the fight in just a few moments," concluded the space adventurer with a laugh. "Are you really planning to start fighting?" asked Karen. The Brazilian didn't respond. He had started a quick walk around the room. Then he turned to Professor Schwartz. "Tell me, man from old Europe, that device that looks like a Geiger counter you carry, is it some kind of atomic weapon?" "What?" "Thomason. It has many applications, and it might shoot an intensive stream of soporific gas like a powerful disintegrating ray. Although it won't be useful for getting out of this confinement. We are isolated." But Dario had continued his walk around the table. Suddenly he stopped, headed to the room where he had been sleeping a short while ago, and took the diving suit he used for high-altitude flights. He examined the oxygen device, spinning the bottle in his hands. Karen and Schwartz looked at him without saying anything, though their faces showed considerable unease. "I'm going to try something. Don't worry about me. I'll always keep in mind that you need me, and will try to help you. Does any of you know how to pierce iron with an oxygen torch?" "Hey Cox, maybe this can help you," said Schwartz, handing him one of the tiny spare boxes he carried in his strange device. "Inside here is nuclear energy in a small battery. If you manage to detonate it, for example with a bullet, we'll all take a trip to the beyond. I imagine that, in the extreme, it could be a solution for everyone. Doesn't that seem right to you?" Dario took the tiny and dangerous capsule, and then examined the pistol he carried in his flight suit pocket. He then stored both in one of his pockets. But there must be some way out of here, and Dario was sure he would find it. For more than 10 minutes, he examined the walls of all the departments. He found nothing. But upon reaching the room that served as the kitchen, he found a solution. In addition to the necessary objects, there was also a large kitchen, gas and electric, with an oven and air renovator. But Dario was only interested in the gas supply bottle. From his own oxygen bottle, he extracted a flexible steel tube, which, along with the gas tip, he transformed in the blink of an eye into something very different from a torch, but very useful, as he soon demonstrated. "If you pierce the door, the harmful gas from this ship will penetrate and we will die," exclaimed Karen when she realized what the Brazilian was trying to do. "Don't worry. While I pierce with my torch, you will climb onto the table. Then, while I work on the other door, place a linoleum patch over the hole, and I suppose our stronger atmosphere pressure will hold it. Then you can use my tool to resolder the breach." Dario headed to the door and lit his improvised torch. After a few minutes, without the other two responding, he managed to create a hole in the wall large enough to allow his body to pass through. Finally, with a kick, he tore the iron plate away and quickly slipped through the hole. Next, already enveloped in the shadows of the previous compartment, he set out to drill the other wall. He maneuvered so that the corrosive flame tongue didn't drill the iron completely, leaving a thin layer so that the fire wouldn't betray his work on the other side of the wall. Then he could break the iron with a kick and exit. Luck was on his side until the end of his unusual work, as the oxygen bottle had been reduced to less than half, and he would later need it for his lungs. Finally, he finished his work. He hung the bottle back on his back, coiled the tube of his diving suit helmet, and smiled satisfactorily. Then, wielding the pistol, he gave a violent kick to the circle he had pierced, and the breach was left open, through which he exited quickly, like a cat from its hole. He found himself on the walkway next to the large chimney. But he saw no one in those surroundings. Leaning over the railing, he saw down there, around the enormous machine, beings dressed in blue flailing like demons in hell. Powerful sparks of light were coming out of the machine's vents. He started running up the walkway, clinging to the wall to avoid being spotted from below, heading towards where Mason had led him to see the strange woman. But after ascending 2 floors, he saw 2 of those rare types approaching and froze. However, the individuals passed by, seemingly without seeing him, almost next to him without stopping, when Dario was about to take them out with his pistol. Perplexed and thoughtful, Dario kept climbing, and upon reaching the landing, through which they had entered when they arrived at the ship, saw live rays of light and violent flashes within the passage. He also saw several masked figures running back and forth. With the pistol ready, the terrestrial ran towards them, finally stopping at a prudent distance. And that's when he discovered something surprising. All those beings were watching him, just as the 2 he bumped into on the walkway had watched him, but they paid him no mind. He saw them transporting metallic boxes towards the side doors from which the bright flashes emerged. Determined to shoot anyone who got in his way, he approached one of the doors. And once inside the department, Dario saw a machine attached to the wall and a kind of skylight in the ceiling. It was a sliding opening through which the sky, illuminated by the sun, could be seen. And the machine was nothing other than an atomic cannon, which was launching anti-gravitational grenades. Surprised, but certain that something beyond human understanding was happening there, he blended in among those men. And once he pushed one, seeing him hesitate and become disoriented without knowing what to do. Therefore, he decided to act without wasting time. He saw an individual carrying a perforated plastic sheet and placing it in a slot of the machine. The cannon launched another one of those grenades. The individual returned with another sheet, but Dario took it from his hands and saw him continue his way with the same naturalness as if he had continued to carry it. He saw him making the gesture of placing it in the slot and going back to fetch more. But the machine didn't fire that time. Nevertheless, the other individuals who were cooperating in one way or another with the operation of the atomic cannon didn't even realize it. "These beings are idiots," he said, increasingly amazed. "They are so mechanized that they don't conceive a flaw." Then he approached the screen and managed to catch several sparkling points flying swiftly through the sky, trying to escape the anti-gravitational field. It wasn't hard for him to identify those ships as belonging to the UN Space Army. Dario then maneuvered with the visor screen controls, rotating the bird's-eye view, and could see that around the beings from Antares' ship, there was a legion of terrestrial combat spacecraft, many of them already trapped by anti-gravitational immobility. Then he distinguished a familiar ship, stopped near the enormous blue spindle of the Valther II. He recognized it with a roar of rage. It was his own spaceship, now piloted by Basil and Mark, whom he saw exiting the gondola through the open hatch. His friends had come to rescue their boss and friend, but they too became victims of the same fate as Dario Cox. Seeing this, fury dominated the strong Brazilian. He looked around, now seeing great confusion among the operators of the atomic cannon. Suddenly, something was heard inside the department, and Cox was astonished to hear a familiar voice speaking to him with clear cadence in the international Esperanto language, though with an angry and authoritative accent. "Did you see me, Dario? How did you enter your chamber? 1. You're disabling a weapon that serves us for defense. Don't you know I can kill you right now? Grab it, idiots. I'm ordering you." The masked ones looked at him through their periscopes and rushed at him without any hesitation. But even if only out of dignity, Dario had to make it clear that his profession was fighting, which he executed scientifically. He turned to several of those tiny beings, and that's when he realized who the masked blue servants were. For he wasn't fighting against living beings, but against robotic machines, without any knowledge, except that of their complicated electronic circuits. In less than 10 minutes, he had taken control of the department. He jumped over the dented metallic bodies, stepping on springs, mechanisms, electric batteries, electronic registrars, in a confused heap of sparks and dense smoke, and headed towards the hallway. But the woman's voice continued echoing in his brain. "What have you done, senseless? Don't you understand that I only wish to paralyze those idiots attacking us, forming a gravitational field that prevents them from harassing us, and thus allows us to move away from them? But I can't waste time now with explanations. Get out of there, Dario, and return to your cabin." However, the Brazilian was not willing to be intimidated by that authoritative voice. Therefore, without paying attention, he jumped over the mutilated robots and ran towards the door. In the hallway, he saw Mason running, wearing his air mask, and thought that the subject could also explain many of the things he needed to know. "Don't be an imbecile, Mr. Cox," he heard him shout. But Dario didn't give him time to say more. He jumped as if he had springs in his legs and grabbed him by the waist, rolling both of them awkwardly on the ground. And with the first punch Dario threw at his adversary in the stomach, he saw him shrink, and with a choked sigh become inert in his arms. Then he stood up, carried his unconscious victim on his shoulder, and ran towards the ladder leading to the room where he met that wonderful yet strange woman. However, he didn't walk more than 20 steps, for suddenly he felt an unusual dizziness, and his vision blurred. He fell rolling to the ground, with Mason still held by the legs. Perhaps it was his strain, holding his prisoner's body, that prevented him from rolling beneath the walkway and falling to the bottom of the chimney, towards where the enormous machine operated by the beings dressed in blue was still functioning. He lay down on the same edge, held by an iron handrail. Dario didn't know how long he had remained unconscious, but when he opened his eyes, he found himself on a bed, surrounded by several people, all of them familiar. First, he saw Karen Vasiev and Franz Schwartz. He also saw Basil Tyrrell, the young man with the nicotinated mustache, Mark O'Brien, freckled, tall, and blond, and 2 more men, who were wearing the uniform of the American Air Army, though with the insignia of the International Army of the UN. He also recognized the bedroom where he had rested before. "Look how our hero is coming to," Dario heard Basil Tyrrell exclaiming ironically. Finally, Dario managed to articulate a word and asked, "But what are you doing here?" "Exactly the same as you, old buccaneer. Clark Sutton's ogre sent us 2 days ago to Mauna Loa to prepare our spaceship. And when he had everything borrowed, eaten, and needed, he set you up as bait for a blonde and exotic fish." "Red, pink, and blue," corrected O'Brien. "Have you seen her?" asked Dario. Basil Tyrrell made a face as if in ecstasy and responded, "Yes, just a few minutes ago. She's celestial." Everyone laughed. And it was O'Brien, after a moment, who explained. Everything went as Sutton had prepared. More than 2,000 devices concentrated in Hawaii, ready to launch into space when Captain Dario Cox, with his DELTA-5, gave the alarm. Naturally, they bit the bait here, as they suspected that the famous Cox knew about the Paul matter better than Paul himself. Professor and Professoress, from Berlin and Moscow respectively, were already with you, having left a shortwave radio transmitter running, which served as our orientation to approach this enormous blue cigar like vandals. Better said, to where it was before, since now we've gone into free space and are flying outside Earth's attraction. And when Basil shamelessly told this woman that she was the most beautiful female he had ever met in his entire dirty and dragged-out life, do you know what she responded? But it was Karen Vasiev who stepped forward and spoke with a certain hint of triumph in her words. She said, "Beautiful, maybe. Although I make and unmake myself on a whim. In reality, for you, I am old. I count with 800 years on Earth. Don't you think you should respect my grays a little?" That was what she said, Mr. Cox. And seeing the expression of astonishment that Dario adopted, O'Brien added, "It's true, Dario. She's 800 years old, and more than half of them have been spent traveling through space. Is she immortal? Asked the bedridden Dario with a weak thread of voice. No, simply longevity. She told us something about the conservation and regeneration of genetic cells, a very complicated procedure that we haven't understood, finished Franz Schwartz. Although I have recorded a tape in the small belly of Thomason. How clever Thomason is, Professor Schwartz, grumbled Dario, smiling and standing up to look attentively at his friends. And now, what do you think to do? Nothing. We'll talk about that later with Sonda. Sonda. Is she named that? That's what she said. She intends to stop at Vesta to recover and reorganize her decimated robotic luggage. I comfort myself thinking that she has no bad intentions towards us, and that she is willing to disorganize Paul's people, finished Mark O'Brien. Has she also talked to you about him? Then, all we need to do is turn her on and take her bound to Brasilia so she can be judged and interrogated by the technicians, exclaimed the smiling Cox. Yes, to Brasilia, my friend. Come and listen to the television we have in the hall, and you'll see what news you receive from Earth. Q. Paul has rebelled, hasn't he? Asked. He, if he's alive, or his accomplices infiltrated in the high governmental spheres. The attack we launched from Mauna Loa served as a clarion call, and more than 100 governments have been imprisoned by troops that caught the international organization unprepared. A regularization committee has been formed in India, and from there, thousands of amphibious ships are emerging in all directions to subjugate the 5 continents. The surprise has been so great that there hasn't even been bloodshed, for now. Listen to this radiovisor at a distance. Cox quickly maneuvered the television that was on the table, and soon the screen lit up, showing the somewhat blurry vision of a subject broadcasting on Earth through multiple channels. At that moment, a huge podium and more than 50 microphones were seen. On it gestured an unknown subject, and beside him, individuals in uniform with traitor faces were visible. Universal unity, said that man in Esperanto, or equality of rights for all peoples of the universe. This is the most important political movement in 24 centuries of historical existence. Citizens of the world, we stand before the most perfect reality in the evolution of the human race, to which we will all contribute along the laurel-edy path of a glorious peace. There were some interferences, and then the speaker continued. It is not rebellion against international agreements, it is not sedition to sworn duties, but reorganization under a single world government. All peoples will be governed by a unique and central government, and led by the greatest economist and statesman of all time, the powerful Hugh Paul, from the disappeared Australian Federation. Among all who heard this news, the name Paul, secret agent and fake financier, traitor and murderer, fell like a bomb, as it demonstrated that his death had been a comedy. A horrendous farce precursor to betrayal. This is over, murmured Franz Schwartz sadly. On Earth, the dictatorship of an ambitious madman has been established. Poor humanity.